Town and the Shadow Minister for Public Utilities. Today we'll be treating with several of the issues in the public domain and expressing the opposition's viewpoint and making suggestions for treating with those issues. Without further ado, I want to hand over now to my colleague, MP Barry Padarat, who will take you further.
Good morning, Trinidad and Tobago. There are three specific areas that I would like to touch today that has found its way into the public's domain, and we, as a responsible opposition, believe that it is our duty to ventilate our views on these developments as well as the views of many within our fold and the national community. On Thursday last, the Prime Minister addressed the nation through the post-cabinet news conference. And what we saw was the most arrogant display of contempt towards the people of Trinidad and Tobago. I say this against the backdrop that there were great expectations from all and sundry that a minority government, having lost the THA elections and then subsequently the local government elections, would at least attempt to salvage what was left of Trinidad and Tobago under their tenure. These comments I don't make lightly, because the government has lost the moral authority to run Trinidad and Tobago and the affairs of Trinidad and Tobago, in that they are now in a position of being a minority government, having lost the confidence of the people of both Trinidad and Tobago. They are now a lame duck administration, an administration that even their own members, if we are to look at the popular vote, you will see that even their own PNM members, the rank and file, have indicated to the People's National Movement and the Prime Minister that they have lost confidence of the ruling party. This is a simple case in terms of the Prime Minister's response, as simply just a case of they don't care. They have taken the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago for granted in the most flippant, callous, dictatorial response to keeping ministers who are known non-performers. You know, Deputy Political Leader Jillian John, she said to me, she said, this government is like the walking dead. This government is a dead man walking. And this is how the population views the government, as they are on their knees, begging for mercy, but showing no mercy to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. It was the expectation of not only the UNC, but the business community, chambers, civil society, religious groups. They had all hoped to see critical areas being addressed in terms of national security, public utilities, health, education. But what did we get from the most callous dictatorial Prime Minister on Thursday? These bungling failures who are the greatest symbol of PNM failure in the person of Hines, Amor, Gonzalez, Gatsby Dolly, Shamfa, Dial Singh, just to name a few. They were comforted in knowing that their incompetence was being kept in place. The Prime Minister chose to remove none of them out of spite and out of malice. The Prime Minister wants us to believe that a reshuffle was not on the cards. But the Prime Minister is now a strong straw man. And he is exhibiting strong straw man syndrome. He has indicated that he will not bow to public pressure, while you, the citizens, are raped, robbed, and ripped apart in your homes. But in all of that the Prime Minister did and said on Thursday, there was an admission that it makes no sense reshuffling a bunch of losers who has lost the confidence of the population. That is the first thing that we took from what the Prime Minister has said. It is an admission that it makes no sense reshuffling a bunch of losers who has lost the confidence of the population. There was a second bit that came out of the Prime Minister's conversation with the population on Thursday. And the Prime Minister essentially admitted that he cannot attract new talent to the cabinet. No one wants to go down with a sinking ship. And therefore, I want to remind the population that there was a leader of government business who said to the Trinidad Guardian on Monday when the Parliament was being reopened, when asked whether or not there was going to be a new lineup of senators on the government bench, the leader of government business, Minister Camille Robinson-Regis, said that may come after the retreat. That bit of information juxtaposed to the position the Prime Minister took on Thursday is a clear admission that no one wants to go down with the sinking ship of a Rowley-led administration. And therefore the Prime Minister failed to attract any new talent coming into the cabinet. You know, we understand that with the reshuffle it made no sense, because it is the same people, the same khaki pants, and therefore you can expect no difference in terms of these losers who has lost the confidence of the population to be able to attract or bring about any significant changes within new portfolios, because they have demonstrated in 8 years their incompetence and their inability to lead ministries. And therefore, what I found also interesting was the Prime Minister introduced this issue of respect. And the Prime Minister has been parroting this issue of respect. I want to ask, who has created the most toxic, vulgar, vile, and obscene political environment in the country? And today says the problem is respect? A man who has no respect for his wife, his children, and women in this country then says that the biggest problem of working with the opposition is the issue of respect. I want to repeat, who has created the most toxic, vulgar, vile, and obscene political environment in the history of Trinidad and Tobago? No other politician than the current Prime Minister, Keith Rowley. The political leader of the United National Congress has responded as early as Monday, and also I noticed in today's newspaper, many of the media outlets are carrying the headline, Kamala all hands on deck. And the opposition's position is that we have always been committed to coming to the table, but coming to the table not to complain, but to bring real, tangible solutions. We have met with this government on several occasions, as indicated by the political leader, the leader of the opposition, former Prime Minister, Mrs. Kamala Persad-Bissessar. And when we go to those meetings, we have provided the government with solutions. We have provided them with recommendations of both long-term and short-term measures. Measures that they can implement tomorrow if they have the political will to do so. We have said to them that you need to look at the ambits that fall under the Ministry of National Security. There are areas such as customs, immigration. There are areas that deal with homeland security matters that needs to be repackaged, repurposed, and refocused, separate and apart from the crime-fighting tools that are needed through a specific ministry, that we are able then, therefore, to focus on getting the guns off the streets, dismantling the gangs, and dealing with the drug trafficking issue that continues to plague our country. Mrs. Persad-Bissessar has said on behalf of the opposition that all of us must come together. It is not just a government and opposition approach. We have done that time and time again, and we have seen no results. This government has an implementation deficit. That is the greatest challenge that the government is facing. So they come, they speak to the population, they get the ideas from the opposition, they get the ideas from the business community, etc. But it is an implementation deficit that this government is facing. And that implementation deficit can be seen across the board in almost every ministry. I want to say on behalf of the opposition and to the Prime Minister this morning, to humble yourself. You have already failed in the area of crime fighting and in almost every sector in this country. let those with a proven track record come to the table. You know, in local parlance, we sometimes say you have to put your tail between your legs. And Prime Minister, you have failed, and therefore the opposition is saying to you this morning, humble yourself. You cannot use the excuse of personal animosity, hate, and acrimony to keep people who are solution-oriented, who are known to be able to provide policy, prescription, and real tangible results to bring down the crime rate. And when we speak as the UNC, we also speak on behalf of our partners. We just concluded a local government election where, for the UNC and our partners, one of the most burning issues was securing Trinidad and Tobago. And it is no secret that one of the most vocal persons who has delivered to Trinidad and Tobago real tangible results in terms of bringing down serious crime and also the murder rate is former Commissioner Minister of National Security Gary Griffith. And therefore the UNC is saying to the Prime Minister this morning that we were the ones who made the first move. I think the Guardian got it wrong when they carried that front page that said the Prime Minister made the first move. We are not surprised by anything the Guardian says and does anymore. But for the public record, it was former Prime Minister, Leader of the Opposition, Member of Parliament for Sapare, in the most responsible manner, called upon the Prime Minister to meet. As I said, we have met before. We called for that meeting in February of this year. We also parroted the views of former Commissioner of Police that it required everyone to come together, not just the UNC and the PNM, not just the government and the opposition, but it required an all-hands-on-deck approach. And all hands on deck also include persons with proven track records. You cannot continue to depend on the prayers to the Lord and faith. And you know, in local parlance, we say God helps those who help themselves. Gary Griffith has demonstrated, both as Minister of National Security under Kamala Persad as Prime Minister and Commissioner of Police, that he can get the job done. And therefore, this morning, what we are saying is that the Prime Minister knows all the problems. He has pretty much admitted that he can bring no new talent to the table. So therefore, we can expect no difference in terms of these bungling failures, this symbol of PNM failure. Hines is the greatest apart from Keith Rowley in terms of being a symbol of PNM failure. And while you continue to keep Hines at the helm of national security, the rest of the national security apparatus is falling. It is collapsing around him. And that includes institutions that are simply not delivering the results. So therefore, the opposition's view is, yes, we will go to the table. But we will go to the table with persons that we believe that can provide those real tangible solutions that will work with us. Because we have seen in the past where we have made recommendations to the government and their implementation deficit, their lack of political will, has not brought about those solutions. So therefore, Captain Gary Griffith will be joining us and will form part of the team that the UNC takes forward in terms of providing solutions on the national security issue. So Prime Minister, humble yourself. Put aside the hate and the acrimony that Mr. Manning spoke about, because that hate and acrimony is transferring itself into the national security environment of this country. And therefore, we do need all hands on deck, but we need hands on deck, most importantly, that can bring about solutions. The other issue that has found its way into the public domain has to do with the sexual harassment lawsuit that involved former Minister of Government, Darrell Smith. I want to say that the cover-up in this Darrell Smith matter continues. But we must not forget how we got to this position. And how did we get here? The Prime Minister wants us to believe that he has no involvement in this matter. He has washed his hands of this entire scenario. But let us recollect. This matter would not have found its way into the public domain had it not been for the Trinidad Newsday and the opposition, UNC. Point 1. The Prime Minister was the person who selected Darrell Smith as chairman of the Diego Martin Regional Corporation and introduced him to the political landscape of Trinidad and Tobago. Point 2. The Prime Minister selected him as a PNM candidate for the 2015 general election to become a member of Parliament. Point 3. The Prime Minister made Darrell Smith a minister of government in 2015. Point 4. When the story broke, the Prime Minister shifted Darrell Smith to cool down the tempo to the Ministry of Housing. Point 5. Leader of Government Business Camille Robinson-Regis told the media when the story broke that it was a non-story. Point 6. When there was water more than flour and Smith was removed, the Prime Minister said he did so based on new information, and a team headed by former PS Jackie Wilson was established. Point 7. The Prime Minister then indicated upon the completion of the work of that committee that the report was unusable. I want to refer to the Trinidad Express editorial, October 22nd, 2019, and this is what that editorial had to say. Much has happened since April 2018, when, in response to media reports of sexual misconduct, allegations against former Minister Darrell Smith, government spokespeople claimed no knowledge, limited knowledge, or nothing untoward. At the time, Prime Minister Dr. Rowley was trying to find out what went on there. Planning Minister Camille Robinson-Regis did not know, and this is a direct quote, where you all are getting this story. The media is trying to make a story out of a non-story. I don't know if you all are pursuing real issues instead of trying to set an agenda. And Attorney General Faris Al-Rawi and Minister Stuart Young said it was a routine labor dispute. The public and alleged victim, Smith's former personal secretary, were justified in expecting a swift, procedural, proper investigation under the innocuous banner of wrongful dismissal, had unfolded a precise detailing of 45 days of sexual harassment allegedly perpetrated by a then holder of ministerial office. Corroborated by other members of staff, it stirred a national conversation about sexual harassment in the workplace. Apart from the obvious necessity for accountability from Smith, much else relies on the findings and fate of the report into his conduct while he was minister. The use and ethics of non-disclosure agreements in the public service, the conduct of Permanent Secretary Joan Mendez, to whom the Secretary claimed she took her complaint, the practice and policies around contract personal ministerial staff, etc. The report by Permanent Secretary Jackie Wilson, Folade Mutata, and Elaine Green were submitted on June 4, 2018. Its findings regarding the conduct of some public officers had to be overseen by the PSC, Public Service Commission, said the Prime Minister, and they were following due process and natural justice. The public interpreted that to mean the government was addressing whatever legal matters arose with a view to releasing the report. I want to repeat that line in the Trinidad Express editorial, October 2019. the public interpreted the words of the Prime Minister to mean that the government was addressing whatever legal matters arose with a view to releasing the report. This newspaper is unsure what is meant by the report being unusable and why simple remedies could not be found in 16 months. We concur with Attorney Martin George that it is a highly unacceptable for the government to not properly account to citizens on such serious matters. Ladies and gentlemen, the Prime Minister, in a feeble, weak attempt to wash his hands of this Daryl Smith fiasco, one, in Daryl's dismissal, said new information was brought forward. Up to this day, today is September 17th, 2023, the Prime Minister has not divulged to the national community what was that new information. Today we call on the Prime Minister to indicate in the public interest what was the new information that he received. Secondly, why was the report in the Prime Minister's view unusable? However, in a High Court judgment, the High Court judge in delivering that judgment indicated that it was in the public's interest for that report to be released, and she called upon the office of the Prime Minister to put it in the public domain. But this gets curiouser and more interesting. In all of this, we have not heard where is the government's sexual harassment policy in the workplace that was promised over 3 years ago. Where is the legislation that was promised to protect workers against sexual misconduct? And who called the shot for Daryl Smith to go to the United States of America as a trade attaché for the government of Trinidad and Tobago? What criteria was used to select Daryl Smith? Today, I want to tell the national community that on the instruction of the Leader of the Opposition, Mrs. Kamala Persad-Bissessar, MP Saddam Hussein and myself, we will be filing a Freedom of Information into the appointment of Daryl Smith as a trade attaché in terms of the criteria used for his selection. And I will tell you why that is very important. You would recall that there was a member of the United National Congress who crossed the floor prior to the local government election, just a few days before the local government election. And that person is none other than Tahaka Obika. Tahaka Obika found himself employed as a senior trade consultant at the Ministry of Trade upon crossing the floor from the UNC to the People's National Movement and making all manner of accusations against the party, our leader, and our members. But I'll explain to you, and you will connect the dots. Mr. Obika, now being employed as a senior trade consultant at the Ministry of Trade, it appears that there's a pattern that has been developing. And the pattern that is developing between the appointment of Daryl Smith as a trade attaché, Tahaka Obika as a senior consultant at the Ministry of Trade after crossing the floor prior to the local government elections. The government is prostituting top jobs and positions for political expediency. I repeat that. The government is prostituting top jobs and positions in the state sector for political expediency. And therefore, there are a number of burning questions that remain in the public domain as it relates to Daryl Smith's appointment, this entire fiasco of not having the report laid at least in the Parliament or in the public domain. as it relates to the public interest, but also we are seeing a pattern being developed where state resources, whether it's jobs, cushy positions abroad, etc., are being used, are being prostituted by the state, by the Prime Minister, for political expediency. And therefore, the UNC announces this morning that we have the Freedom of Information request already prepared, and we will be filing those Freedom of Information requests for those bits of information as it relates to the criteria, the hiring practice used to send Daryl Smith to the United States as a trade attaché for Trinidad and Tobago, and to hire Tahaka Obika for hundreds of thousands of dollars as a senior trade consultant at the Ministry of Trade, having crossed just before the local government election from the UNC into the PNM. There's one matter, finally, that I want to raise, and that has to do with the RIC and the impending water and electricity rates. On the 11th of September, sorry, it was the 8th of September, I filed a question in the Parliament asking the Ministry of Public Utilities to indicate what was the total debt owed to TNTech as of May 2023 as it relates to state enterprises, statutory authorities, and ministries. I can share with you, and I saw one of the media houses already got a hold of it, that total sum owed from the state as of May 2023 to TNTech is $1.4 billion. Wow. $1.4 billion. We have seen, and we are going to enter another budget season coming up, where of the estimates, a number of state enterprises, statutory authorities, and ministries, they have millions of dollars in arrears to both TNTech and WASA. And we have been asking whether or not the challenges at both TNTech and WASA, in terms of being in the red, in terms of not being self-sufficient, in terms of not being able to meet their production and operational costs, is a direct result of the actions of the state in terms of not providing the subsidies, one, and two, in terms of not paying their bills. And whether or not this was because it was a direct attempt by the government to drive these state companies into the ground, demonize the workers just as they did with Petrotrin, in an effort to close down these state companies, privatize the sector. And I want to share with you the contents of the letter that I've sent to the RIC. Because as part of the RIC's responsibility in terms of determining these new rates, they are to consider the financial situation of these companies. And we have been raising for quite a while in the public domain the issue of the debts particularly owed to TNTech and WASA, and whether or not these outstanding receivables were being considered and were being pursued by the government to ensure that these companies were up and running or were in a better position to meet their operational and production costs. We have written, myself as shadow member for Public Utilities, I have written to the RIC. That letter will go off to the RIC in the morning. We'll share with members of the media the contents of the letter. But we have called upon the RIC to take note, and we have provided them with the response that was given in the Parliament. We have provided them with that response as an official government position as it relates to the debt owed to TNTech via the ministries, the statutory authorities, and the state enterprises. And we are calling on the RIC to halt because we are very much aware that they have completed the rate review. They have an existing relationship with the government, and the government is waiting for the opportune time to announce these new rates. Well, we are calling on both the government and the RIC to halt any move to increase the rates in light of the information that has now found its way into the public domain as it relates to the $1.4 billion that is owed to TNTech by the state. I want to share with you, ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, that out of that $1.4 billion owed to TNTech up to May 2023, $800 million is owed to TNTech by who? WASA. WASA owes TNTech up to May 2023 $800 million. And while the Minister of Public Utilities will have us believe that the government is separate and apart from WASA, the policy, the direction, the prescription, the management, the Board of Commissioners who are appointed by the Cabinet of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, they and WASA are one and the same. After 8 years of managing or mismanaging WASA, we are now told that WASA owes, and essentially what WASA means is that the government has stifled and under-resourced many of these state entities that today those state entities are on their knees. WASA owes TNTech $800 million, but it doesn't stop there. UDCOT owes WASA $102 million. And who is the line minister for UDCOT? The Prime Minister is the line minister for UDCOT. Ministry of Education, $115 million owed to WASA from the Ministry of Education. The Ministry of Public Utilities is the body responsible for ensuring that these companies are operating at their optimum. $20 million. This is just a sample of the breakdown of the answer provided. And we are going to send off that letter to the RIC tomorrow. And I also want to add that on the instructions of the political leader, Mrs. Kamala Prasad-Bisesa, a similar approach in terms of finding out how much money is owed to WASA from the state is going to be undertaken. We will file that question inside of the Parliament, but we're also going to file that question as a freedom of information for WASA in terms of how much does the state owe WASA and whether or not, and we highly suspect it is because of those massive debts that a number of these projects that would bring relief to many within Trinidad and Tobago as this water crisis continues. The member of Oropouche West reminds me in his own constituency of Oropouche West, in my own constituency of Princestown, in parts of Faisabad, Oropouche East, Separia, La Brea, Point Fortin, San Fernando, Chaguanas West and Chaguanas East, Couva North and Couva South, Caroni Central, Caroni East, Sangre Grande, Komoto, Manzanilla, Mayaro. We speak to our colleagues all the time up to this morning. Many parts of Chatham, Cedros, Icacus, they are without water. And while the minister plays the political games of speaking about sabotage and so on, and without any concrete evidence, without being able to provide the authorities with any evidence of any of the claims that he made, the minister continues to obfuscate, the minister continues to bob, weave, and the minister continues to be totally at sea and lost as it relates to the matters. And he too is one of the major symbols of PNM failure. And therefore I think the political leader of the UNC was quite correct when she said, it's not just Hines have to go or Gonzalez have to go. They all have to go. So this morning we have shared some information with you that we have unearthed through the various arms that are available to us as members of Parliament. We will share additional But we will be sending out those freedom of information requests, those three that I've mentioned to you, to get the answers that the government is deliberately withholding from the people of Trinidad and Tobago in a desperate, feeble, and weak attempt to hold on to their remaining days, their last days, as well, while they attempt to drag the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago down with them as they exit office. So I now pass you over to my colleague, Mr. Tanku.
Thank you very much, MP Padarat. And that's a perfect segue, because what my colleague was talking about just now is the critical need for us to find alternative sources of information, because this government continues to refuse to account to the population for the actions they have taken and for the amount of funding that they have utilized. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, welcome to the most stressful time of the year, the PNM budget season. You know, whenever a PNM budget is approaching, people across the nation start to feel anxious, wondering what fresh hell Calm Imbert is about to unleash on the population of Trinidad and Tobago. Are there going to be more budget cuts to essential social programming? Are there going to be new taxes? Is he going to raise gas prices yet again because the people still have not revolted? This PNM has eviscerated the GATE and the National Scholarship Program. The OJT program is a mere shadow of its former glory. The student laptop program is all but extinct. I don't think there's anything left for the PNM to take away from our children. But if there's one person who could find something to take away, it is Calm Imbert. It has been 8 years, and naturally, we all know by now what to expect from the Rowley administration. They are nothing if not consistent. In the run-up to Budget Day, the Minister of Finance and the Prime Minister especially will try to bamboozle us with alternative facts in creative ways designed to disguise the true state of our nation's economy and to gaslight the population into accepting their flawed narrative. It hasn't dawned on them yet that after 8 years we've all caught on to their little tricks. To quote the lyrics of a famous rock song, we don't get fooled again. So now that we have all wised up to the economic trickery and the financial fictions, let's get back to reality and start talking about the real issues that are affecting our everyday lives. Over the past few weeks especially, the opposition has been engaging with stakeholders, including our constituents, in frank and honest conversations about the most urgent and critical issues that are facing them currently. And today I want to deal with a few of the revelations that have come to our attention over the past few days and to put it in specific context. So let's get to the facts. Yesterday, Trinidad and Tobago woke up to the news that Republic Bank Limited, one of the largest banks in Trinidad and Tobago, had cut their credit cards US dollar spending limit by half, from $10,000 per cycle to $5,000 per cycle from Thursday, September 21st, 2023. That's Thursday coming. And if you were using their Visa Travel Money card, that's the VTM card, the loading limit and card balances have also been sharply slashed. Now, this is not the first time that Republic or any of the other banks have reduced their spending allowance for US dollars. In fact, Republic Bank in 2021 did the same thing. They cut from $12,000 to $10,000, and now they've cut from $10,000 to $5,000. When they did it then, when they reduced the maximum limit then, they clearly stated that this was as a direct result of the ongoing challenge with foreign exchange availability. Well, obviously, the foreign exchange challenge has gotten worse since then, because according to the central bank, today as we sit here speaking to you, ladies and gentlemen, the level of this country's foreign exchange reserves is the worst it has been for the last 16 years. When this PNM administration took office, there was 12 months of import cover and $10.5 billion in reserves. Under this PNM administration, under this PNM government, we have lost $4.2 billion in foreign exchange reserves over the last 8 years. But that alone does not tell the whole story. Anybody who has gone to the bank to get foreign exchange to travel will tell you of the nightmares and the hoops that they had to jump through to get a US $100 or $200 with which they are expected to fund their expenditure abroad for days and weeks at a time. 100 US and 200 US dollars. Many small and medium-sized businesses, which represent more than 90% of all registered businesses in Trinidad and Tobago, small traders and manufacturers, have found it impossible to get foreign exchange to transact business. Many having to join queues for months in the hope that they can get a few dollars to pay suppliers before their goodwill and credit runs out. For thousands of SMEs, ladies and gentlemen, reliable access to foreign exchange, even in small amounts, is the very lifeblood of their existence. And since now, as we have just established, and as they have experienced, since they can't get what they need from the banks directly by request, many small businesses have had to resort to using their credit card to make purchases, to transact their business, to feed their business, to operate their business. These businesses hire small quantities of persons, but they number a large en masse when a community together. This heartless PNM government, ladies and gentlemen, you will recall, instead of increasing the availability of foreign exchange so we don't have this crisis, instead of creating the avenues for generating more foreign exchange, the first thing that this government did with regard to foreign exchange, ladies and gentlemen, was to institute a penalty tax, the online purchase tax, artificially raising the cost of goods imported by even you, average citizens. Today, the use of credit cards to transact business by these SMEs is now an established norm. And so, the action by Republic Bank, soon to be followed by other banks, in cutting the credit card allowance is the unkindest cut of all. It will cripple the already severely wounded small and medium-sized business sector, particularly a sector that continues to be negatively affected by government's deliberate policy, including holding the business community to ransom to get their VAT refunds. The state's limp-wristed approach to dealing with the crime wave enveloping this nation. Higher transport costs, the impending property tax, higher electricity rates, failure to be able to access water. The state at every turn has failed the SME sector. But while on the other hand, the government is boasting that it is encouraging business activity, it is obvious based on what I have just indicated that nothing could be further from the truth. While they talk the talk, this government has insisted in walking in the opposite direction. But that too is not all. Parents with children studying abroad, persons going abroad for medical reasons, distance learning students who are based in Trinidad and Tobago and enrolled in programs from foreign universities are also going to be penalized by the slash in foreign exchange availability. Not only is this measure likely to cause the collapse of even more SMEs, further job loss, the elimination of potential tax revenue to the state, but it will continue to discourage the development of SMEs. On the other hand, it will encourage the development of the illicit black market for foreign exchange that currently exists in this country as a direct result of the shortage of foreign exchange. When businesses, ladies and gentlemen, are forced to access the foreign exchange illegal market, the black market, it is obvious that the cost is going to be higher, and that cost is passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices for goods and services. But why are we here now? How did you get to this absolute crisis of foreign exchange, where you actually have to know somebody in the bank to hope and pray that you could get a small amount of foreign exchange to save your business, or to save your child's educational career, or to buy books, or to buy medicines? Republic Bank's action is as a direct result of a drastic foreign exchange problem. Foreign exchange availability is a crisis in this country today, not because foreign exchange is not available, but because of who it is not available to. We are in a foreign exchange crisis, ladies and gentlemen. The Minister of Finance will call it whatever he wants. He would hide behind technical definitions. But if you are a business owner and you cannot get foreign exchange to save your business, to buy raw materials, to produce materials for sale, if you cannot save your business, if you cannot pay your workers, you are in a crisis. If you are a parent with a child abroad studying and you cannot get foreign exchange to pay for their fees and their rent and their housing and their allowances, then you are in a crisis. And I tell you, Trinidad and Tobago is in a serious foreign exchange crisis. This is as a direct result of government's policy and government's failure. This government has failed consistently to attract a sustained inflow of foreign investment to Trinidad and Tobago. It has failed to create an environment where investors will be confident that they can bring their money into this country and will be able to recover and repatriate their profits. It was this government's policy and laissez-faire attitude and lackadaisical conduct by ministers that caused major foreign exchange earners like ArcelorMittal to leave our shores. It was this government which shut down Petrotrin and put nothing in its place, depriving the country of hundreds of millions of US dollars per year in revenue. In a study conducted a few years ago, I think it was in 2020, by the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Industry and Commerce, I correct myself. That study found that more than 80% of the firms interviewed stated clearly that they could not access enough foreign exchange to buy raw materials and finished products from suppliers. 2/3 of the businesses surveyed reported that they received less than half of their foreign exchange requirements from banks. Business companies operating for years have had their reputations and businesses slashed, destroyed, damaged over the last 8 years because of the unavailability of adequate foreign exchange. This is the result of the PNM government's policies, ladies and gentlemen. So when you hear a Minister of Finance boast that they are providing support for small and medium-sized businesses, ladies and gentlemen, ask the small and medium-sized businesses. Ask those who are barely surviving now and who will be adversely affected by the slash in availability of foreign exchange via the use of their credit cards. These are bread and butter issues, ladies and gentlemen. These are bread and butter issues for thousands of persons and thousands of businesses. And instead of confronting their failures and being honest with the state of our country's finances, ladies and gentlemen, all we are getting from the Minister of Finance and his colleagues is denial and distraction. Less than a month ago, the Vice President of Guyana, our CARICOM neighbor, revealed that Trinidadian businesses were traveling to Guyana to access foreign exchange because they could not get what they needed in this country to conduct their business. Amazingly, one government official, an official paid by the taxpayers of this country to seek its interests, one government official who's a former minister, a PNM Minister of Finance, instead of thanking the Guyanese government for their support in helping our businessmen attach and attract and access foreign exchange which you cannot get here, instead of thanking the Guyanese government for that, try to trivialize the entire process and the entire issue, going so far to deny that a foreign exchange shortage in fact existed. That is government's policy: distraction, dismissal, and lie. Every single business house in this country knows that there's a foreign exchange crisis, that there's a foreign exchange shortage, that they cannot access easily foreign exchange to transact business in this country. Every single business house in this country knows that. Every citizen knows that already. But yet you have a government employee, a senior government employee, stating that there's no foreign exchange shortage. Ironically, the Minister of Finance acknowledged that there is a shortage and has done nothing about it. But that has been the history of this government, and yet their unwillingness and refusal to be truthful to the population of this country. Ladies and gentlemen, this government has been borrowing money hand over fist, and they have been borrowing money more on the foreign market than ever before. This government has accessed foreign exchange by borrowing more than any previous government in the history of our country. Yet, they have failed to put any measure in place to create new foreign exchange, new foreign reserves generation, new opportunities to generate foreign reserves, foreign exchange, so that they can repay the very debts that they are borrowing. And now that the country cannot afford to pay its foreign debts, the minister is now borrowing more money to pay back debt that they were previously borrowed. And they are boasting about it. Instead of again coming to the country with truth, the minister is creating PR schemes to distract from the reality. Let me give you an example of what I'm speaking about, ladies and gentlemen. On Monday, the Minister of Finance boasted, he announced, and I quote, a successful, heavily oversubscribed bond issue by the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago of US $560 million on the international capital market. Imbert then had the temerity to claim that the market had confidence in the country under his stewardship. He claimed that somehow the ability to raise this bond reflected good management of the country's accounts. Well, let me clear that up, ladies and gentlemen. A bond issued by a government is a loan. It is a debt that taxpayers will have to pay. And Imbert's attempt to color borrowing money as something that is an accomplishment is a farce, a scam, and a PR gimmick. What are the facts, ladies and gentlemen, except for the fact that he is misleading the population with lyrics? What are the facts? The government had a bond of $550 million that is due for payment next year, 2024. $550 million. You know how much Imbert has borrowed? $560 million. $10 million US more. That is 600 million TT dollars more than what the bond is that he's seeking to repay. But that's not all. The old bond was at an interest rate of 4.37%. Imbert's new bond, to pay off that bond, Imbert's new bond is at a new interest rate of 5.9%, higher than the 4.37% that he's seeking. So he is borrowing more money at a higher interest rate to pay debt. And the minister is boasting that that reflects good management under his stewardship. Well, if that is good management, Barry, if that is good management, my friend, then there's no surprise then that Trinidad and Tobago is in the financial, economic, and social crisis that we are in today. The minister boasted that the bond was oversubscribed. Well, of course it was. Of course it was oversubscribed. When you are offering a higher interest rate than the rest of the world, when you are offering a higher interest rate than even the U.S. Treasury is offering for similar type bonds, when you are offering a higher interest rate for that, you don't think that people will move from one to the next? That's what has happened. Investors will gladly take the opportunity for higher returns. It's not their fault. They will be blessed by the government giving them more interest on their debts than the rest of the world is willing to do. But this gift that they are giving to the bondholders now, this gift that you're giving to them to attract them, this excessive interest that you are being willing to pay, that comes off the back of taxpayers of this country. So paying more in interest than you need to is nothing to boast about, Mr. Imbert. It is nothing to celebrate. In fact, it is something to pay close attention to, Trinidad and Tobago, because this gentleman is gifting away of money as if it is his. Imbert boasted as well that the bond was issued at the lowest coupons in Latin America. Why? Simply, the tenor was short at under 10 years, so that the IR was lower. The shorter the term, the lower the interest rate. This too is nothing to celebrate. This is basic year one economics, MP Padaran. In fact, it might be wiser. It might have been much more financially prudent. It might have been a more sensible strategy, given the inability of this current government to meet its debt obligations abroad from existing reserves. It may have been wiser for the government and the minister to borrow at 15 to 25 years to allow the country more time to develop an adequate cash flow to repay the debt. This short-term deal is not ideal because the government predictably will have to refinance this bond when it becomes due in 7 years again, and likely at again another higher interest rate, as opposed to locking down a lower interest rate from now for the 15 to 25 year period. Failure to do so is nothing to boast about, Minister Imbert. In fact, what it represents is a poor decision-making ability for finances on your behalf, on your part. Looking at the international market, the current international market, the short-term US dollar rates are higher now, and the US yield curve is inverted. Any pragmatic investor would have advised that it makes much more sense to borrow longer term at effectively lower rates for a longer period. That is common sense. But it has been found that common sense is not common when you are dealing with the Minister of Finance and this government. But that is not all either. This is an expensive refinancing of a loan. Call it what you will. Recycled debt at a higher cost to taxpayers is nothing to boast about. It is effectively just kicking the responsibility for repayment of these debts down the road to future generations without putting anything in place to facilitate them generating the foreign exchange required to pay off these debts. The Minister of Finance is placing burdens on future generations of Trinidad and Tobago, intergenerational debt, without providing them with any opportunities to resolve these debts. He is bankrupting this country down the road into the future. Given that nothing was put in place to repay the initial debt, refinancing this debt adds nothing to the productive capacity of the country, nothing to investment, nothing to foreign exchange generation, nothing to employment. All it does is add additional debt payable in foreign exchange. But the minister's anxiety to create a false impression that this is some wonderful achievement should not be taken lightly. I would not be surprised, ladies and gentlemen, if the minister's preference to refinance such a $500 million US debt and at a higher rate was not a contributing factor to Republic Bank's decision to cut access to US dollars via their credit cards. I wouldn't be surprised if the minister's action made, in some way, contributed to the decision of Republic Bank to cut foreign exchange access. But I note, it is clear that the announcement to do so came almost immediately, within hours, following the Prime Minister's description of his dragon gas fiasco. The decision by Republic Bank to cut its credit card access was announced within hours of the Prime Minister's description of his dragon gas deal as a huge diplomatic boulder that he has been pushing uphill. For the last 6 years, ladies and gentlemen, the Prime Minister and his Minister of Energy and his Minister of Finance has given false hope to this country that this dragon gas deal would somehow provide a supply of gas. They held out to the country that dragon gas was an absolute solution, a magic bullet, a major pill that would somehow solve this country's severe financial constraints. It will somehow manage to solve our problems. A one-off again, ladies and gentlemen. Rowley and Imbert created no new industry because they were waiting for gas from the Dragon field. They invested in no foreign exchange generator because they were waiting for gas from the Dragon field. They created no new environment conducive to the investment at all to attract foreign direct investment because they were waiting on gas from Dragon field. They did not grow the economy because they pegged this country's future on one thing, dragon gas. And now, after 6 years of failure to achieve a single cubic inch of dragon gas, the Prime Minister and his minions are still selling amazingly. They are still selling this country dreams that magically next year in 2024, this country will get dragon gas. It is not gas that's coming Trinidad and Tobago. All we are getting is gaslighting. Today, thanks to this government's policies, this country is facing a gas shortage, together with a foreign exchange shortage, with no specific plan or identifiable source of gas. This means that very soon the downstream sector of Point Lisas will face a massive exodus when companies cannot get gas. This means more job loss, less foreign exchange, less revenue generation, less economic development. This means a direct contributor, ladies and gentlemen, to making foreign exchange availability even less easy. When these industries in Point Lisas go down, ladies and gentlemen, as they have started to already, when they go down because of the unavailability of gas, our access, our foreign exchange generators contract even more. So that this foreign exchange crisis, this foreign exchange shortage, this inability for us to get foreign exchange now will get predictably worse given the failure of dragon gas. Is this what prompted Republic Bank to take the decisions announced mere hours after to make foreign exchange more difficult to their clients, to their supporters, to their businessmen? Is this what prompted Republic Bank to do that? And perhaps even worse, ladies and gentlemen, is the failure of this government to implement a proper diversification plan while they jeopardize the energy sector plans. So they have destroyed the energy sector, effectively crippled the sector. But they have put nothing in place to have an alternative source of foreign exchange generation. We must never forget that when Imbert inherited this economy, when the PNM took office, the infrastructure for sport, health and education, tourism, new industries with the potential to generate billions of new revenue streams in foreign exchange, thousands of well-paying permanent jobs, and immense potential for tax revenue to the state from multiple related businesses and new employees. We must never forget that they found that there. Sport, health and education, tourism. And what did they do? They shut it down. Today an economic crisis looms as this government with one hand has placed all economic dependency on the energy sector, while at the other hand taken away every possible opportunity for that sector to survive, and without putting in place a backup diversification plan. So the government's primary source of foreign exchange, the energy sector, is now facing a dim future. And with it, so is Trinidad and Tobago. Rowley and Imbert, ladies and gentlemen, are absolutely aware of this. And after the cabinet retreat recently, last week, the rest of the PNM MPs are also aware of the truth, but they continue to try to mislead the population. On Thursday, the Prime Minister slipped when he said that during the retreat, Imbert had presented a set of graphs which show the progression, or more likely the regression, of the economy since 2024. That is for the period that the PNM has been in office. And with a straight face, Dr. Rowley told the population that he wanted to educate the population. Well, MP Padarat, we just indicated that we had to go through the Freedom of Information Act passed by not by a PNM administration, passed by a UNC administration. We had to go through freedom of information because the government refuses to provide information when it can and when it should. With a straight face, this Prime Minister tells the population that he wants to educate the population, and that sometime in the not too distant future, after the budget debate, he and Imbert was going to do a spotlight on the economy to indicate where the economy was, where the country is, where it's going, where it can go, what the issues are, and how they are treating with those issues. Sometime in the future? Why? That is not good enough, ladies and gentlemen. That is not good enough at all, Minister Imbert. That is not good enough at all, Mr. Prime Minister. In fact, the budget debate is the perfect time to provide this information to the population. That is the exact reason for the budget debate. Why wait until after? What are they hiding? Sometime in the future. It is the same sometime in the future that they were going to present the reports that we just spoke about. Sometime in the future for this government means never. The population should note as well that this government has had spotlights on the economy before. This is not the first time that they're planning to or promising to. They've had it at least 2 or 3 times before, and every time before, it has taken place before the budget, before the delivery of the annual budget. What makes this year so different? Maybe it's the presentation that they saw. Maybe it's the truth that somehow or the other they were presented with at the retreat that they are hiding from the population of Trinidad and Tobago. Sometime before, ladies and gentlemen, that cannot be acceptable. The minister's intention is very clear. The Prime Minister's intention is very clear. He plans to use his majority in the Parliament to pass this budget, and maybe afterwards, if the public pressures him, maybe afterwards, he will stand on a stage on Hyatt where nobody can question him. He will stand at a stage on Hyatt where he can articulate and lecture to the crowd, lecture the population, and pontificate without the risk of being asked the hard questions or being challenged by the opposition. I am saying call the Parliament to office now. Call us to the chamber now, today. Call us to the chamber and present this spotlight to the economy, spotlight on the economy. Call us to the chamber now and present it to the Parliament. Face the scrutiny of the members of the opposition. Face the questions that we have to ask. Face the country. But if you are afraid of doing that, host the same spotlight even now, before the budget, and let the country know the truth about where this government, this PNM administration, has taken this country. Before I go, ladies and gentlemen, I want to share one more fact with you, the population of Trinidad and Tobago. The Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago is the entity that provides foreign exchange to the banking sector and selected conglomerates and businesses. Since this government, this PNM government has been in office, more than $12 billion has been sold by the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago to what it calls authorized dealers. $12 billion. So it is not that foreign exchange is not being sold. It is not even that foreign exchange has not been made available. It is to whom foreign exchange has been made available. In fact, For the year 2023 alone to date, 2023, this current year to date, 837 million US dollars has already been sold by the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago. The question is to whom? Because small and medium-sized businesses and regular average citizens do not have access to that money. You all will recall when former governor of the Central Bank, Jwala Rambaran, dared to release the names of some of the largest beneficiaries of foreign exchange. He was fired for the effort. But the country deserves to know. This is not the foreign exchange reserves of the Minister of Finance or the Governor of the Central Bank or the Prime Minister. It is not their foreign exchange reserves. These foreign exchange reserves were generated on the backs of the population of Trinidad and Tobago. The money that is there in reserves belongs to the population of Trinidad and Tobago. And we must be told who it is that is being provided to. And why? What is the criteria being used to provide it to those persons? And why then we cannot get, why then small and medium-sized businesses have been starved of this money? The country deserves to know, ladies and gentlemen, because while businesses and conglomerates are getting hundreds of millions, average citizens are being driven to the black market. Businesses are being suffocated. It is time to change the legislation so that the population will know who is benefiting, because some of these conglomerates, ladies and gentlemen, also have interest in the banks. And so their sister companies can conceivably get access via the banks from the allocation from the central bank. So while Bali M, now a public figure, so I will not get into more detail than that, but while Bali M publicly has stated on numerous occasions that he could not get foreign exchange to import cheese or meat, a conglomerate, which includes a grocery and a bank, is easily able to access foreign exchange by the millions from the central bank and import that same cheese and that same meat, effectively stealing the business away from Bali. And that's not the only situation that happens. That is happening in every other sector. The lack of transparency of foreign exchange allocation has been used by this government to promote specific business interests at the expense of others. And that is why Shoba, who is importing a few pieces of clothing selling in a small booth, or Ruby, selling underwear in a stall in the Port of Spain market, or Bobby, who is bringing in shoes to sell in the streets in Chaguanas, or the lady selling perfume from a car trunk at the bottom of Frederick Street in Port of Spain. That is why they cannot get foreign exchange. But conglomerates and subsidiaries who are doing the exact same businesses that they are involved in can get foreign exchange without a problem in the world. These are the persons, ladies and gentlemen, average citizens trying to make an honest dollar, who are going to be most severely affected by this cut, this harshest cut of all in the credit card limit initiated by Republic Bank and soon to be followed by all the other banks. And for them, this will be catastrophic. It is time to right this wrong. Foreign exchange exists. Foreign exchange availability is what does not exist to these individuals. Ironically, it is the same central bank governor who recently said, and I quote, "In the short run, I think as a society we must have a consistent foreign exchange regime that involves better and equitable access." Better and equitable access. Today I challenge Alvin Hilaire, governor of the central bank, to tell this country, having admitted that the system of foreign exchange distribution is inequitable, unequal, and unfair, tell us what he has done to correct this problem. It is not enough for him to sit in his office and collect his salary paid for by taxpayers. Know that something is wrong. Know that small and medium-sized businesses are being sabotaged by unequal access to foreign exchange. Know that average citizens cannot get the most minimal of foreign exchange to meet their needs, and do nothing about it. In the same vein, the Minister of Finance admits that there is a foreign exchange shortage, but to date can point to not one single new significant and sustained project that he has undertaken or that is a government has undertaken that has brought a substantial inflow of foreign exchange, except borrowing. Why? Because this Minister of Finance does not care. Because these are small businesses affected. Because these are average citizens that are affected. Because these are regular people that are suffering. This PNM regime, this Minister of Finance, and this Prime Minister simply does not care. But we must care. So Rowley and Imbert and company can try all that they want to fool us with political spin and manipulative PR strategies. As Buju Banton says, who feels it knows. And we know that despite all the PNM mamagai, things have not gotten better for us. Maybe it has gotten better for PNM friends, family, and financiers. But the standard of living in this country has certainly dropped drastically for the rest of Trinidad and Tobago. In other words, their narrative simply does not align with our lived experiences. But the problem, ladies and gentlemen, is that because this government has failed to put any mechanism in place to generate new streams of foreign exchange, this shortage, this foreign exchange unavailability will continue to get worse. What is worse about all of that, and all of that is horrendous in itself, the deafening silence of the Minister of Finance on this critical issue, the refusal of the Minister of Finance and his government to come to the country and account for the failures to take action, to find new solutions, is deafening. This silence is unacceptable. Citizens can no longer continue to wait for this government to take action in their behalf. Citizens can no longer afford to wait for this government to do something to benefit them. If after 8 years and $420 billion, this country has been driven to the ground with the government's knees on the necks of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, if after 8 years and $420 billion, government has not been able to make things better, Rowley being in office for the next 24 months will not do anything else. As a matter of fact, as I have said before, the foreign exchange crisis and every other social and economic indicator will continue to worsen because this government simply does not care about anybody except their friends, financiers, and family. It is time to reboot. I support the call by my colleague just referred to from our political leader, the Honorable Kamala Prasad Bisesa, leader of the opposition. It is time that citizens stand up, speak out, and demand that this government call election now. Call election now and give this country a chance to breathe again. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you very much. If there are any questions from the media, we will take them now.
I have a question here for Epipala. Given what you're saying when you meet with the Prime Minister, are you saying that Guy Griffith will be part of the opposition's team to meet with him?
In the wisdom of our political leader and leader of the opposition, she would make those determinations. But you would recall that Gary Griffith and the NTA were part of the accommodation we had for the local government elections. It is not whether the opposition will bring him as part of our team. The issue is that the government needs to accept help from persons who have a proven track record and who can help. The Prime Minister has to humble himself, as I said. His problem is his judgment is clouded by personal heat. So we are saying to the Prime Minister this morning, humble yourself. Bring persons to the table like Gary Griffith. Include Gary Griffith, who has a proven track record in dealing with bringing down serious crime in the country. So I'm almost certain that Mrs. Prasad Bisesa will be engaging with others within the party and in our accommodation to determine who those persons will be. But the bigger issue is the Prime Minister must understand that it is not only the opposition. We have reached crisis stage where it is all hands on deck, literally. And therefore, we are not in support of this sort of clandestine approach where you meet behind closed doors. It is time this country has frank conversations of what needs to be done and the players that needs to be involved. So as I said, the Prime Minister cannot continue to use this personal hate and acrimony that he has for persons in the opposition who are opposed to him or in the national space, but rather put country first.
And also to everybody, do you have any information on the possible investors interested in purchasing Wassa or TNT? That's for that question.
We have heard in the past of Chinese companies in particular having toured some of Wassa's facilities and TNT's facilities. So I think that question would be better posed to the government to say whether or not this is their directive, because by all indications it is showing that Wassa and TNT may more than likely suffer the same fate as Petrotrin. And this morning I was at pains to highlight that the reason why these state companies continue to fail, and we saw it not only with Petrotrin, we saw it with TSCT and others, where the government purposely drives these companies into the ground through these debts, not servicing these debts, and putting the company in a situation where they are not financially viable. They are not able to meet their operational and production costs. So I will really throw that question into the domain of the Minister of Public Utilities. But by all directions, and from what we are hearing in terms of Chinese companies having visited, we would not be surprised by that.
And Kanku, what advice would you give to SMEs, small companies, given what has happened with Republic Bank and the slashing of the credit card?
What this government, what these SMEs need to do now, quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, is to get together, form themselves into units, and approach the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance to actually do something about this crisis. Foreign exchange control is rested in the hands of the central bank and the government directs the handling of foreign exchange. Until and unless these SMEs can have access, there's not much more that they can do. They are totally dependent right now on the banking system and on funding from the black market. The only thing they can do is start to push pressure on the government and hold them to account, make the demands we have made today, find out who is getting this foreign exchange. Because if we do not, we will continue the saga where SMEs get totally destroyed and big business thrive. We will have a polarization of the economy into the one hands.
What will the opposition's position be if the government refuses to talk to include Gary Griffith?
What will be the opposition's position on that matter? We have called through the leader of the opposition for all hands on deck, as I've said earlier. I think that will really be for the population to decide, because we have seen in the past where the approval ratings of the police service rose astronomically under Gary Griffith.
But will the opposition still meet with the government without Gary Griffith?
Those matters we will caucus on. I will not make a decision unilaterally. Those matters we'll have to caucus on in terms of what our approach will be. In light of what the UNC leader has already put in the public domain, we know what we would like to see happen. And I think I speak for most civic-minded citizens who want to see something actually done. I think the country has reached the position where they're just tired of the constant talk and they want to see the follow-up action. And that's why I said the government has an implementation deficit. That has been the greatest challenge. Griffith has been someone who is seen by the public and the national community as someone who can get the job done. So I'm almost certain those issues will be raised in our caucus, and that's the approach that we will take going forward. But I'm almost certain almost every citizen would want to see him part of those discussions in light of the results and the solutions he was able to bring towards bringing and reducing crime.
If I may as well, it is now 8 years that this government has been in office. And over that 8-year period, the leader of the opposition, Mrs. Kamala Prasad-Desassar, and others on our platform, have consistently provided suggestions for treating with this crime scourge. Consistently. Every Monday night, the leader is at a conference. So we have not hidden our suggestions and recommendations. They are out in the public domain. The challenge has been that the Prime Minister, because it comes from the opposition, has shied away from treating with any of those things. The reason, the issue now, as we see, we are now reaping the whirlwind of that refusal to engage the opposition, not just in discussion and dialogue, but even to treat with the suggestions and recommendations that we have made.
Question to MP Para. The government, well, do you suspect that you talk about the FOI, right? The question here is, do you suspect that you will get nonsense answers, as the person said here, like similarly to what they give in the parliament when you ask questions?
The approach for an freedom of information is very different because you have to ask very specific questions. We have had a very successful run at filing FOIs. In some instances, you would have seen former Attorney General Anand Ram Logan, Ravi Balgobin Maharaj, myself, MP Saddam Hussein, and others have been able to get answers because of the way in which the questions are crafted and because of how the law provides. In the Parliament, the government has the opportunity to say whatever they want when you ask an urgent question. The opposition does not get the opportunity of a reply, and therefore that puts us at a disadvantage because you don't get the specifics. The government just waffles their way through in terms of when asked at the parliamentary level. Through a freedom of information, they are compelled by the law to provide answers. So I have every faith, as MP Tanku spoke earlier, he did mention, thanks to a Pandey United National Congress administration, that we were the ones that were able to bring forward that freedom of information law to Trinidad and Tobago. And as you have seen over the past couple of years, we have been successful in getting the answers because of how the act is framed and the obligations of the state to be compelled to answer based on how the act is framed. So it's not just like what you see in the parliament where they just waffle and they bob and they weave and they provide excuses and they don't answer the questions. Through freedom of information, the approach has to be within the confines of the act and the law.
To MP Tanku, they're saying here that the UNC has started doing its budget consultations. Are they continuing?
Yes. As a matter of fact, we have started budget consultations on Wednesday last. They are going exceptionally well. The public has been overwhelmingly present and articulate. We have been providing open air and getting a substantial amount of contributions from the floor, even including suggestions and recommendations for dealing with things like crime, the water shortages, etc. If I may, I could tell you that we are continuing, the budget consultations are continuing, and that we are proposing to have some more. Until budget day, we are going on Tuesday, this Tuesday coming, we will be at the Sugarhouse Borough Corporation Hall from 6 p.m. On Wednesday, we will be at the Kuva Tabaki Talparo Regional Corporation at the Presal High School at 6 p.m. On Thursday, we will be at the Princeton Regional Corporation Hall at 5 p.m. On Friday, we'll be at the Sangre Grande Regional Corporation at Duranta Gardens Community Center, which is near to the corporation's headquarters, at 6 p.m. Tuesday, next is web pages to check the leader of the opposition's Facebook page as well for those dates, times, and venues, and we will continue to share them. This gives the opportunity for, if the tradition continues the way it has been going thus far, what people are saying continuously, loudly, is that they are fed up of being taken for granted, and they're fed up of the mistrust and mistreatment and the hate and the spite and the malice being foisted upon them by this government. People are extremely angry at the government, and they have already shown that in their vote during the last local government election when they refused to support the People's National Movement. People are indicating to this government clearly that they are not happy with the government as it exists today.
Kevin, members of the media are also messaging us directly. One of the issues that I want to clarify is the issue of the debt from state agencies, ministries, and statutory authorities to T&Tech. I want to just clarify that the 1.4 billion debt owed through the state authorities, statutory authorities, and ministries, that $1.4 billion, when you look at the breakdown, the point I made earlier was that WASA owes, out of that $1.4 billion, WASA owes T&Tech $800 million. The other point that I wanted to raise is that in light of what we are seeing, where WASA is owing T&Tech $800 million, we in the opposition, we are going to use the avenues available to us through the Parliament and through the Freedom of Information to now find out how much ministries, statutory authorities, and state agencies owe WASA, because we suspect that it is much higher than the $1.4 billion that is owed to T&Tech. And the underlying point that links the both issues is that the state continues to under-resource, rack up these huge bills, and puts these state companies into the position that they are in today, driving them into the ground.
Marie, if I may as well, you would have been in the Standing Finance Committee with us as well. And every time these issues come up, there's a heading that for payment to the public utilities. And on those headings, the government usually has an allocation. And every time we would ask if this allocation is enough to wipe out the arrears. And on every occasion, the various ministers will solemnly state that yes, it is enough to wipe out the arrears and to keep the amount of money going forward so that they will have no arrears to these various agencies. It is very disturbing. I'm sure you must be very upset because when WASA and T&Tech does not get their due, we see the effect on the service provided to the customers.
Yes. Based on a lot of the issues that we have raised in the public domain today, we are hopeful that we were able to provide some level of clarity and also the opposition's position in terms of these matters going forward. You will be hearing more from us over the next couple of days. We will be resuming our Monday night meetings, and then we have the weekly press conferences. So I know MP Tanko went through with you the schedule for the budget consultations. So we'd like to thank you for joining us this morning and keeping the issues alive so that we can get some answers and get some results. I think the country, as Dave has mentioned, whether it's in the area of water, public utilities, finance and the economy, social services, the country has reached the point where they are tired of the excuses. They are not interested in talk shops anymore. People have really reached the optimum in terms of their response to many of the bread and butter issues in the country. And Dave, based on what we see happening over the next couple of weeks with the budget, I always say that when these issues affect people's homes and when it affects their pockets, that's when they become most alert. I'm hoping that Trinidad and Tobago, you have reached the stage of being very alert so that we can remove this inept, wicked, corrupt government and replace it with better governance, greater governance in the interest of all the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So we thank you for joining us on this Sunday morning, and we look forward to joining with you again on our social media platforms and through our media conferences during the week.